Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood-Coleman, the Chief Editorial Officer and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. The last week or two have been extremely active as regards global events, so when I've gone about the task of crafting my political intelligence briefings, I found that no longer had I written them, that they had become somewhat obsolete as other events transpired of equivalent international importance. As a result, I urge you to take note of the forthcoming editions, as they will be filled with some of the big stories unfolding in the world. In this edition, I do want to take some time to focus on Sweden and Finland and their official submissions to join NATO. The two Nordic countries, which have not been previously militarily aligned, were changing their stances amid Russian aggression in Europe. With Russia waging a brutal and unprovoked war against Ukraine, Finland and Sweden had concluded that it would be in the best interest of their national security to join NATO. As part of NATO, they would benefit from the protections of Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Indeed, Article 5 stipulated that an attack on one member state would be viewed as an attack on all, with an obligation for mutual defense. NATO holds an open-door policy as regards aspirants to membership in the Security Alliance. That being said, membership required the consent of all 30 existing members. Accession to NATO would not be easy, given objections by some NATO countries, such as Turkey, to fast-track membership. While NATO countries such as the United States welcomed NATO accession for Finland and Sweden, Turkey had a very different view. While the United States President Joe Biden warmly welcomed and strongly supported the historic applications from Finland and Sweden for membership in NATO, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had a very different tone. He said that Turkey would not look positively on Sweden and Finland's NATO's application unless its concerns regarding Kurdish militancy were addressed. For some time, Turkey has accused Western European countries, Sweden particularly, of harboring Kurdish militants, its views as terrorists. For Turkey, the PKK was no less than a terrorist organization. For other countries, Kurdish nationalism was seen as a legitimate aspiration of self-determination. Those differences were now being highlighted in sharp relief given the bids by Finland and Sweden to join the North Atlantic Military Alliance. By the end of June 2022, progress had been made in finding an agreement to move forward. Turkey agreed not to veto the membership bids of Sweden and Finland, setting the path for those two countries to join the NATO alliance. Turkey extracted key concessions in exchange for agreeing not to stop Sweden and Finland from joining NATO. Specifically, Turkey would now be positioned to seek the extradition of alleged terrorist suspects, particularly members of extremist Kurdish groups and those associated with an exiled Turkish cleric, Fethullah Gulen. A memorandum between Turkey, Finland, and Sweden was signed outlining cooperation in counter-terrorism, which satisfied Turkey's concerns that the two Nordic countries would do more to crack down on the Kurdish Workers' Party, PKK, and also end support for the Kurdish People's Defense Units, YPG, in Syria, which is part of the US-supported Syrian Democratic Forces fighting Islamic State terrorists. According to reporting from Politico, there were also indications that Turkey would acquire F-16 fighter jets in return for withdrawing its opposition to Finnish and Swedish accession to NATO. A meeting in Madrid, Spain, at the end of the month made it official. All leaders of the 30-member NATO military alliance agreed to formally invite Sweden and Finland to join NATO. With Finland being located on the border with Russia, now NATO would add 800 miles to its border with Russia. As well, because of Sweden's control over the Gotland Island, located in close proximity to the Russian Oblast of Kaliningrad, now NATO would also control portions of the Baltic Sea close to the Russian enclave. Making matters worse for Russia was not only that now NATO countries would have expanded terrain right on its borders, there was the fact that Ukraine was now heavily armed by many NATO member states. Moreover, with the United States surging both weaponry and military personnel to NATO's eastern flank, including a permanent headquarters in Poland, there was an even heavier military presence on Russia's doorstep. As well, there would be additional rotational combat brigades in Romania, intensified rotational deployments in the Baltic region, increased numbers of destroyers stationed in Rota, Spain, and 2 additional F-35 squadrons in the United Kingdom. A third wrinkle for Russia was the fact that NATO Secretary General has vowed to build a new NATO rapid reaction force of 300,000. Again, this would only intensify the military heft by NATO on Russia's border. Indeed, in response to its war with Ukraine, Russia was now dealing with the one thing it resisted for some time: NATO expansion on its very doorsteps. As noted by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, this is bad news for one person in particular. Vladimir Putin wanted less NATO, and now he was going to get more NATO on his borders. Russia reacted to the news of accession by Finland and Sweden to NATO by lashing out in anger and with threats. Putin said that there would be serious military and political consequences of such a move, and it would require it to restore military balance, including the deployment of nuclear weapons. United States President Joe Biden used muscular military language to warn Putin and Russia that NATO member states would be acting to protect their interests. He declared, and I quote, "In a moment when Russian President Vladimir Putin has shattered peace in Europe and attacked the very, very tenets of rule-based order, the United States and our allies were going to step up." President Biden also took a shot at Russian President Vladimir Putin, noting that the war on Ukraine had only strengthened NATO. Biden declared, "He tried to weaken us, expected our resolve to fracture, but he's getting exactly what he did not want. He wanted the Finlandization of NATO. He got the NATOization of Finland." Meanwhile, NATO released its new strategic concept, the first such document since 2010. The document, which was a blueprint for dealing with upcoming threats, reflected the transformed security environment in Europe. While the previous strategic concept characterized Russia as a strategic partner and did not mention China at all, the new document directly referenced Russian aggression and Chinese influence, respectively. On July 5, 2022, the NATO accession procedures for Sweden and Finland began as the protocols were signed, setting off a ratification process in member countries. On a related note is the war in Ukraine, specifically with Ukrainian forces withdrawing from the last major Ukrainian stronghold in Luhansk. That development effectively put the eastern region under Russian control. Ukraine has said that it made the decision to withdraw in order to preserve the lives of Ukrainian defenders. President Volodymyr Zelensky made clear that Ukrainian forces would return pending an increase in the supply of modern weapons. I'm also looking at Lithuania's overland shipment restrictions that will affect the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. The Kaliningrad Oblast is the westernmost oblast in Russia, located on the Baltic Sea. It's bordered by Lithuania and Poland. At issue were EU sanctions that went into effect in June of 2022, with Lithuania closing off the transport route for steel and other metals. In keeping with these EU sanctions, the effect on Kaliningrad was profound. Officials in Kaliningrad said that more than half of the enclave's imports were affected by the Lithuanian decision, which it characterized as a blockade and threatened consequences. The government in Vilnius was undeterred and rejected that accusation. At the end of World War II, Lithuania was reoccupied by Soviet forces and only regained its independence in 1990 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. In this way, Lithuania, like other Baltic states of Latvia and Estonia, were painfully aware of the history of Soviet encroachment into Baltic territory in the past. Lithuania, along with the other Baltic states of Latvia and Estonia, would have clear cause for alarm regarding Russia. In mid-2015, for example, Russia had questioned the recognition of the independence of the Baltic nation-states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. The Office of the Russian Chief Prosecutor announced plans to examine the legitimacy of the former Soviet Union's 1991 recognition of the three Baltic countries and to specifically consider whether the action was legal. I'm doing a special section called the National Spotlight, where I'm looking at the House Select Committee's probe into the January 6th attack on the Capitol Hill. There are multiple testimonials given by regarding former President Donald Trump's glee that his supporters wanted to hang his own vice president, Mike Pence. There was testimony by Cassidy Hutchinson, an aide who worked in an office close to the Oval Office. She testified that Trump became increasingly enraged and volatile about his 2020 re-election loss and was determined to join his supporters at the Capitol on the day that would turn into an attempted insurrection. Hutchinson also testified that Trump lunged for Secret Service agents when he was taken back to the White House instead of being allowed to go to the Capitol with his supporters who were attacking the seat of legislative power. There was testimony from Hutchinson that Trump didn't care that his supporters were armed and dangerous. In fact, he wanted the weapons detectors removed to accommodate them and their weapons. Of significance was the shocking revelations from key witnesses from within the Trump inner circle but pardons sought for wrongdoing by several Trump supporters and Republicans. The bombshells included evidence of witness tampering, which is a felony, as well as a pattern of seditious conspiracy emanating from inside the Oval Office, with Donald Trump as the locus. In essence, Trump knowingly sent a loaded pistol to the Capitol on January 6, 2021, to stop the certification process and thus stop the democratically elected President Joe Biden from assuming power. The fact of the matter was that the House Select Committee cannot bring criminal charges despite the litany of acts of possible criminality offered through these hearings. It would be up to the Department of Justice to determine whether anyone should be charged with crimes and faced prosecution. There are two stories I'm covering across the proverbial pond in the Atlantic and across the pond of the Atlantic in the United Kingdom. The first one centers on the United Kingdom's decision to introduce legislation that would upend post-Brexit trading rules for Northern Ireland. That move would inflame a trade war with the EU. At issue was a bill that would vitiate the already signed withdrawal treaty from the EU. Because Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, has a land border with an EU country, the Republic of Ireland, there was a need for special trading arrangements. Prior to the exit of the UK from the EU, transportation of goods across the border was not an issue, as both the UK and Ireland were EU countries subject to the same EU rules. After Brexit, however, a new system was needed because of the EU rules regulating the passage of food items from non-EU countries into an EU country. Under existing terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol implemented in 2021, there were checks on goods arriving in Northern Ireland from England, Scotland and Wales to prevent them from entering the EU single market via Ireland, while also sidestepping a hard border. The new legislation presented by the UK would eliminate most of those checks, allowing businesses in the UK to deliver goods to Northern Ireland without having to go through an EU customs declaration process. Despite the fact that the legislation would override the very treaty the UK already signed, the Conservative government of the UK has insisted that it does not violate international law. The EU, as expected, has a very different reaction and threatens legal recourse. By the start of July 2022, Germany and Ireland were blasting the bill, saying that the UK's abrogation of the international agreement displayed a lack of, and I quote, good faith. The other major story out of the UK was with regard to the crisis in the government of Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the United Kingdom, with two allies, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Sajid Javid, submitting their resignations. At issue for both Sunak and Javid were frustrations over having to weather reputational damage to the government over back-to-back scandals from Partygate to the Pincher revelations. The resignation of Sunak and Javid coming about 2 weeks after Tory defeats in two important by-elections, and only a month after Johnson survived a confidence vote, would prove politically fatal. Indeed, it was having a domino effect, with several other Tory officials also tendering their resignations as well. Meanwhile, Labour leader Keir Starmer smelled proverbial blood in the water and urged other cabinet ministers to resign. He also called for a snap general election. The pressure on Johnson was profound. After defiantly insisting he would not resign, Boris Johnson on July 7, 2022 said that he would step down once a new Conservative leader was chosen. I'll be covering that heavily in the new edition of the Political Intelligence Briefing, along with the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and the death of Angolan leader Dos Santos. Subscribers can read more about these and other stories at the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. I'd also like to take this time to mention my comprehensive Afghanistan withdrawal report called Sunset in the Graveyard of Empires. That's Sunset in the Graveyard of Empires, which is available for purchase on Amazon.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember, now more than ever, we live in an interconnected world.